media and ETN, so we can get
I've got to find a way how to change my background.
okay, so we're now live on this part. Okay, let me see if it's, you see, yeah, so now we can do share. Okay, so now we're live on social media, live on ETN, and now we can let everyone else in here. And not just me.
Hi.
Hi, good afternoon, good morning, everybody.
Hello.
Hello,
Stephen
everyone.
again. Hi, Stephen.
Hello, Jürgen. Happy holidays.
Yeah, happy
And
holidays.
Connor, happy holidays to you.
Happy holidays to everyone.
Hi, Cordell.
Hello, happy holidays, everyone.
Happy holidays to all.
Happy holidays.
Yeah,
Hi,
you
Mario.
too.
Good afternoon, good evening, Mario. How's Rome? He's there, but I think his microphone is off. Okay, perfect. Okay, so we can probably start. Just give me about 10 seconds, and I just
Hi, Glenn.
announce Cordell, and then we can.
Hello, Juanita. How are you? Happy
Hi,
holidays.
thank you. Same to you.
Perfect. Okay, so I'm going to mute everyone, and then you can unmute yourself once we get started.
Okay.
Aloha and good afternoon or good morning from here. My name is Jürgen Steinmetz, and I'm joining you from livestream.travel and eTober News here in Honolulu. Today, we're celebrating the opening and launch of the World Tourism Network. This was an all-month event. It's one out of many, and we're coming to the end of the month with some really exciting sessions. One of this is today. We're going to learn about a region not so many people know a lot about. Everyone knows where Bermuda is. Everyone heard about the Bermuda Triangle, but I think there's probably a lot more to it. I've never been to Bermuda, so I'm very excited to learn more. And we're going to hear from Cordell Riley, who's joining us and brought his own team of experts we will introduce in a minute. I just wanted to remind everybody to go to WTN.travel. You can click on upcoming events, and you will see there's only just a very few now because we're closing the month of WTN intro events on December 31st. But we have Louis D'Amour coming up with the second session of his Peace to Tourism. He had a first session where we talked about 35 years Peace of Tourism, and now we're going to talk about the next 35 years. And this will be exciting. And our last event for the year, and then we have, I'm sorry, Mr. Herman coming up in Malaysia. He's running our chapter in Malaysia, and he will be putting a group of experts together from Southeast Asia, and we're talking about tourism and the future of tourism in Southeast Asia. And finally, our last event will be with the World Federation of Tour Guides, and we have tour guides from all over the world participating, from Iran to Australia to South Africa to Bhutan to Tanzania. It'll be really exciting. We're going to celebrate the new year. And you probably know that the Spanish flu finished 100 years ago. So we're hoping we can kind of close this 2020 year and start on a new slate with 2021 and slowly also defeat this COVID-19 and start with a fresh attitudes also towards tourism. And tour guides from all over the world will help us in the session on December 30th. Finally, I wanted to remind everyone, if everyone who's here live and everyone who's also listening live right now on eTober News, live stream, Hawaii News Online, and many other publications, you can always find the archive on livestream.travel. So you can listen and watch also all our events we had this month. And we hope you're joining WTN.travel. Just go to WTN.travel and become one of us. World Tourism Network is a new organization. We started out of the discussion on rebuilding.travel, what we had been facilitated since ITB in Berlin. And ITB didn't happen, but we had our meeting in March together with PATA. And this was a discussion that was quite active. Many of you were involved. And now WTN is to structure this. Our goal is really to watch out for the medium and small-sized businesses in the world and help in coordinating efforts around the world to relaunch tourism and working together with WTTC and many other organizations, African Tourism Board, to assist any way we can. Without further delay, I'd like to welcome Cordell Riley. He's joining us from the beautiful island of Bermuda. Welcome.
Good afternoon and happy holidays to everyone. And thank you, Jürgen, for giving us this opportunity. We're happy to share with you what's going on in Bermuda with regards to rebuilding tourism. I want to introduce Glenn Jones, who's the interim CEO of the Bermuda Tourism Authority. And I'm going to let him lead off on the talk this afternoon or this evening, depending on where you are. And then I'll come in after that and filling and any gaps that he's left out. So without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Glenn Jones.
Thanks very much, Cordell. Good to be with you and with Jürgen and all the people who are joining from, it looks like a lot of places around the world. As Cordell mentioned, my name is Glenn Jones. I'm the interim chief executive at the Bermuda Tourism Authority. I'm gonna walk you through some slides that just paint the picture of what the tourism recovery has looked like from Bermuda's perspective, and also try to make some educated guesses about what happens next, because I have to admit, I'm not sure anybody's completely sure exactly how the recovery goes from here. So Cordell, I'm gonna share my screen. You'll have to let me know if you guys can see okay. Let me just do this.
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, great. So I guess the first thing I should do is explain to you, of course, if you don't already know, that Bermuda is an island about 90 minutes from New York by airline, a couple of days by cruise, and we're isolated. So when the government made the decision on March 20 to close to regular air traffic, it had a halting effect on the tourism industry in Bermuda. Everything sort of just closed down. And we remained closed until June 30th. And although that was decimating to the tourism economy, it was very important in terms of keeping the community here safe. And so although it meant sudden joblessness for a lot of people in our community, businesses shuttered, it did actually give us a running start when it came the right time to open the borders again. So I think what this presentation will show you is that, you know, things have really been severely injured, but I think we're in a good spot for a recovery going forward. One other note just to mention, and it's around cruise. Cruise is an important part of the tourism industry in Bermuda as well. And going into 2020, we were expecting 540,000 cruise passengers and 194 cruise calls. In the end this year, we're just gonna be about 6,500 cruise passengers and 4 cruise calls, because although we didn't close our border as it relates to marine traffic, almost all cruise ships out of the United States were halted as part of the CDC's no sail order. So that meant we had no cruise visitors for much of this year as well. But most of this presentation is gonna focus on airlift, because at the Bermuda Tourism Authority, that's what we focus on the most. All right, so first up is airlift capacity. This is really important to us because if you can't get people here by plane, you really can't get the tourism economy going. So this slide really shows you exactly what we were dealing with from a numbers perspective this year. So in the top left are the number of airline seats that fly to Bermuda each year. And you can see over the past 5 years, it's been over 500,000. but we're estimating here in this year, it's going to be less than 200,000. And that's because, as I mentioned, the borders closed for a significant part of our tourism year. In fact, it's the busiest part of our tourism year. And by the time it reopened, airlines were upside down and only adding air capacity gradually. So that top left section tells the story of how many seats we have flying to Bermuda. Under it, what you'll see is how things fluctuated in comparison to last year and the really small airlift capacity that we had coming to the island. And when operating in that kind of environment, it is really difficult to get the volume you need to get the tourism economy humming again. So this is one of the barriers that we faced. This slide will show you how we've been performing since things reopened. So on the far left, you'll see commercial air capacity compared to the same month in the prior year. So what it's telling you is that in July, we had 10% of the air capacity we had the July before. In August, it was 20%, in September, 23%, October, over 30%, and on and on. And then as you go to the right, it tells that same story in other performance categories. So arriving passengers overall, including residents, and then just visitors, and then leisure visitors, where we spend most of our attention. So in July, we had only 5% of the leisure visitors we would expect on a normal July. And of course, July 2020 was the first month that our tourism economy was reopening after the shutdown from COVID. In August, 10% of what we had in the August prior, 16% in September, and then October was, although just 26% of what's normal, did really feel like a successful month for us. And I'll explain why that is in a little while with some of the events that we had happening in Bermuda in the month of October. And then you can see what things look like in November and December. Now, when we look at the actual volume of how many passengers we were getting at that time, that's what's telling the story here. So again, the volume of air capacity seats, the volume of arriving passengers, and the volume of visitors and leisure visitors. I wanted to point out one thing, especially in this slide. If you look at November and December in the leisure visitor and the visitor category, you'll see that December is showing fewer visitors than November. It's important to point that out because on the slide before, we showed you that the December performance versus last year was actually better than November. And the reason there's that anomaly is because Bermuda does have a seasonal visitor industry. So although you might see a performance that's slightly better compared to last year in December than it was in November, the actual volume of visitors was not better in December because typically we have a small volume of visitors overall in December. So just one anomaly to point out as you're looking at our performance since reopening. I mentioned before having the safety record needed to get restarted. And this narrative kind of has an interesting curve as well. So in the first instance, when Bermuda reopened, it reopened with some of the most rigorous testing requirements for travel anywhere in the world. And over time, that testing regime really stood up well. And eventually, the Centers for Disease Control in the United States, who puts out travel advisories for American travelers, got Bermuda all the way down to what we refer to as level 0, meaning there was no health risk to traveling to Bermuda, even though there was a pandemic. Since then, though, during this winter surge, we have lost that footing, and now Bermuda is level 4, so considered by the CDC as a high risk for the spread of COVID. And that's a record we hope to improve over the next few months. The Foreign and Commonwealth Office in the UK has been evaluating the safety of other countries for its citizens, and it does not require any resident coming home from Bermuda to the UK to quarantine for 14 days as it does with most countries. And I think that's a testament to the performance record here. And early on after reopening, Bermuda earned the Safe Travel Seal from the World Travel and Tourism Council because that organization thought Bermuda was doing the right thing to protect travelers as it reopened to tourism. And in this next slide, it explains some of the things that we were doing. Bermuda introduced a safe travel authorization process when it reopened. And this meant that every traveler to Bermuda basically had to apply to the country before it got the green light to come. And in order to be approved in our travel authorization process, you had to complete an online form 24 to 72 hours before departure. And when completing that process, what you had to do is prove that you had a negative COVID-19 PCR test no more than 7 days before travel originally, but in this winter surge, the government has tightened that a bit, so now it's 5 days before travel. You need to upload that PCR test as you are filling out the travel authorization process. And then when you arrive in Bermuda, assuming that you have been approved, you have another COVID-19 PCR test when you land. Once you take that test, you're expected to go to your accommodation and quarantine until that test result is returned negative. Typically that happens between 6 to 10 hours. It can take a little bit longer if the volume is larger, but in most cases, it's never more than 24 hours. And then once you get that second COVID-19 negative result, 2 within a week, because you took one before you traveled, that gives you the opportunity to go out and enjoy the Bermuda leisure visitor experience. I should mention that recently, a longer quarantine period has been introduced for travelers from the UK. That's in response to the new strain of COVID-19 that we've seen from that country. And then once you're in Bermuda, there are additional tests on days 4, 8, and 14 of the visit. And that is the full package of the testing regime for any visitor who's coming to Bermuda, and that testing regime has stood up pretty well. In order to make travel a little bit easier for leisure visitors, we've collaborated with a couple of organizations in the US to make COVID testing easier. Costco Wholesale has a partnership with a company called Azova Health, and they provide PCR saliva testing that can be sent to your home in the mail. You can take the test while a clinician observes you virtually taking the test, and then you can mail it and get your result, and that result can be used in our travel authorization process. And we have a second partnership in New York City, because most of our travelers come from New York, where you can get a PCR saliva or nasal swab test in person in Midtown Manhattan, and then use that test result to complete the traveler authorization process. I'll walk you through next some of the recovery strategies that we've introduced here in Bermuda. One of the things we realized very early on is that we needed to work very closely with our tourism stakeholders on the ground, because if we could not help them find volume and business returning into their doors, that they wouldn't be around when when COVID-19 passed. So there were several things that we did in that regard. These are some of the promotions that we had after reopening in July, in one case in late May, while the borders were closed. But these are some of the things that we did after reopening to try to stimulate spending from travelers, but they were low volume, so there wasn't a lot of travelers to market to, but from residents as well, who weren't traveling and were looking for experiences for them and their families. And so we marketed these recovery strategies to them as well. And this really, we think, helped to get the tourism economy going again, even though it wasn't seeing the volume of visitors it would ordinarily see. In terms of our tourism calendar, these are some of the events that at the start of the year were on the calendar and were able to continue, even though many things were canceled during COVID. And then on top of that, what our team did is layered some promotions on top. Some of them you saw in the previous slide, just to fill in the tourism calendar as much as we can in a way that it appealed to visitors who were coming, but also to residents who were not taking the typical trips that they might take in the summer and the fall. The highlight for us this fall were these sporting events, because what we found is that professional sports all over the world are having a real difficult time getting restarted. And we were able to create a safe environment in Bermuda using our testing regime for some of these sports to get restarted. So this fall in Bermuda, we had the Bermuda Gold Cup, which is a sailing event that typically would happen in the spring. It got moved to the fall, and professional sailors could come here to compete in that event And then the World Match Racing Tour attached its event to it as well. And those two sailing competitions could happen in parallel, safely in Bermuda, with all the competing athletes and all the people associated with the event going through the testing regime. And they were able to do that successfully with no positive test results. World 10's Rugby Series is a new rugby league that had ambitions to start this spring by making stops in, I think it's 7 countries around the world. When the pandemic hit and they were no longer able to do that, they started scouring the globe for a place that they can take all the teams and have a tournament style start to the league. And they found that home here in Bermuda, and the World 10's Rugby Series was here from October 24th to November 7th. And then the PGA Tour has an event in Bermuda, the Bermuda Championship, which we were able to keep on the calendar at its original date, October 26th to November 1st. And all the players and all the associated officials that are and fans associated with that event came to Bermuda, and they were able to have their event here safely as well. And those 3 events, we think, played a critical role in us to having our best recovery months thus far since reopening in July. I'll walk you through next what our hotel inventory looks like, because that's an important part of the recovery as well. I want to give you that picture. So pre-COVID, Bermuda had 2,300 hotel rooms, 2,344. And then you can see the progression of those hotel rooms since reopening. So in July, we were really only operating with 345 hotel rooms. And you match that with the very limited airline capacity that was coming to Bermuda. It's a very constrained environment. But as confidence grew in the testing regime and the return of airlift, more hotels found it safe to reopen and to bring tourism workers back to work. So by October, when we had the month with the heavy sports activity, we were up to 66% of our pre-COVID inventory. I should note here, though, that our largest hotel, Fairmont Southampton, has not reopened since shutting down for COVID, and is now going through a refurbishment process where they hope to reopen sometime in 2022. It's a blessing and a curse, that, because that's inventory we would love to have to generate demand to come to Bermuda. But the truth is that hotel is our biggest group property. And if group travel is severely injured right now, it makes sense to us that they will use this time to enhance the product that they offer in group travel and then reopen in 2022 as hopefully one of the hot new properties in the region. We're up for December 2020, we're at about 63% of what would be our typical hotel inventory at this time. And we hope by April of next year to be at 73% with a new hotel property opening. That's why you see 121 rooms there in yellow. There's a St. Regis property that's due to open at that time. This gives you a quick look at what our hotel capacity and room nights looks like each month when compared to the same month in the prior year. So you can see hotel capacity there shown in the same way it was in the slide before, but hotel room nights really gives you an idea of what kind of business is being generated in the hotel economy. In July, we had just 6% of what we would typically see in July. And at the same time, we had just 10% of what we would typically see in terms of airlift capacity. And then when you move gradually, you can see the slow and gradual improvement as we get to October and November, which is really encouraging because it means that each month we're getting just a little bit better in our performance versus last year. And that's really what you want to see as you're trying to recover the tourism economy. But to be fair, I think here in January and February, the next 2 months, we're going to see that gradual improvement to be curtailed, and we're going to see some regression in the improvements that we've made because the COVID surge has been so devastating everywhere, really. And we hope by March we start to see that gradual improvement again. And what you're seeing there for January, February, and March is how we're pacing for hotel room nights when compared to the same period last year. I thought I'd take you through just a couple of very quick policy pivots that have happened here through COVID that have been really silver linings for Bermuda. One of them is the Work from Bermuda certificate, which was introduced in August part of an immigration policy pivot by the government that really has also helped in the tourism recovery. This gives you an idea of what we were looking at in terms of public relations, which the government asked us to manage around this new program. And it was by far our biggest PR win of the year. By our tracking, there were 1.7 billion impressions for stories about the Work from Bermuda certificate around the world. That media value translates to more than $4 million for Bermuda in general. Part of that for the tourism economy specifically, and then that just gives you an idea of the coverage that was out there, either generated by our organization or generated organically. And there are 587 applicants as of December 16th of this year. 508 have been approved, so there's a high approval rate in this application process. 56% of those who have been approved have already relocated to Bermuda. And I can tell you one of the real bright spots in those people who have moved to Bermuda, a high percentage of them are not what you might traditionally think of for digital nomads. They are C-suite executives, business owners, people who have moved with their whole family, so they have dependents that have come with them. So that's really been helpful to getting the tourism economy restarted, because although these Work from Bermuda certificate holders are residents, their behaviors are a lot like visitors, and that's been very welcomed in the tourism recovery. One other pivot to mention here is around super yachts. At the start of the year, the government enacted some new policies that made Bermuda far more welcoming to this subset of visitors. And although everything is slowed because of COVID, this is one area where we've even seen in some months growth on visitation from years previous. So we think this gives us a good, strong footing for when things normalize to really win with this audience that has been attracted by our safety record, attracted by Bermuda's isolationism and climate and mild climate. And I think that we're going to see some real benefits to that in the immediate aftermath of COVID. All right, so some key takeaways here. Although Bermuda has certainly been slowed by COVID's winter surge, I think what the trends have shown us thus far is that a slow and gradual recovery will occur in 2021. No way, we don't think it gets us back to where we were in 2019, but we think the slow and gradual recovery can occur, restarting again in 2021. We'll see smaller volume from visitors, no doubt, but people are staying longer, and that's been very helpful because it's generating more spending per visitor. So those are some of the trends that we've seen, and affluent travelers are returning to travel first, and we think that's a trend that will continue in 2021. Volume visitation, as we've been talking about, is severely curtailed, including groups, and we think that'll be the case throughout 2021, but there are certain groups which Bermuda is focusing on because it thinks it can win in those areas. And that is sports, as you saw in the example from October, but going forward, we think destination weddings can be a real winner for us because couples, especially in the Northeast, have not been able to have gatherings, have not been able to have the weddings that they want. We think we can convert some of those people to destination weddings where our testing regime helps them to ensure that the people attending their wedding are not at the risk of spreading COVID, and they can have the people there that they want to celebrate that special day. So those are some of the key takeaways for us going into 2021. And I'll end the presentation there to turn it back over to Cordell to lead us through some question and answers.
Thank you, Glenn. What I will do is I'll just talk a little bit about what else we're doing, and I'm going to share my screen. And talk a little bit about some of the things that we are doing on this end, on the ground. So I just wanted to first of all, for those of you who don't quite know, Glenn did mention it from the beginning. Those of you who don't quite know where Bermuda is, this is just a visual to put Bermuda in perspective. We're about 570 570 miles from Cape Hatteras in North Carolina. So 1.5 hour flights, 2 hour flights, basically, to get to Bermuda. Glenn talked about the COVID regulations. This is just an overall visual of those COVID regulations from the Bermuda government in terms of what you can do and what you cannot do. And I think my friend Corey Butterfield already placed the COVID regulations site in the chat group. So if you wanted to have more details about the government regulations, you can go there and find out about the regulations in detail. Glenn covered that already. So I just want to finish off before we get into the question and answer period. One of the things that we're doing on the ground is the Blue Flag Ambassador Program. This is the program that, just change that, sorry. This is the program that we've been running since 1960. So the Bermuda government has been running since 1960. We've taken that over. It's a program that prepares those in the industry to be on the same page when it comes to giving information to visitors. So we talk about the geographical history, the cultural traditions, and the political systems. Of course, we talk about the attractions, the water attractions, flora and fauna, and one of the newest things is the African Diaspora Heritage Trail. And of course, we give a Bermuda historical timeline. And so what that does, it provides people who work in the industry, whether you're taxi drivers, frontline, and we've even had Bermudian residents, residents who come to Bermuda take it to learn about Bermuda. And what this does is provide them with the correct information to give the visitors when they come, so that they are more informed. And we believe that that enhances the visitor experience. So that's from what we've been doing on the ground to enhance tourism. So I'm just going to leave it right there, and we are going to open it up back to you, Jürgen. We're going to open it up for some questions and answers.
Thank you very much. And we only have a handful of people here live. So if you have any questions, just raise your hand and we'd be happy to give you the microphone. And I have to say, I'm quite impressed. This is really an approach I haven't seen, and I've listened to a lot of different countries and their way how to combat safe travel. But you guys are absolutely exceptional. And if I looked up some numbers, and I think the numbers speak for itself. If you look in Bermuda, you had 9,074 cases per million, compared to the United States, 58,196, or 33,148 in the UK, or my country of birth, Germany, has always been trying to be exceptionally 19,352. That number is quite low compared by current standards. And if you look at the number of people who unfortunately passed away, you're at 145 per million. The US is at 1,022, and the UK at 1,034. And finally, what's probably the most impressive number is the testing. And I know there has been a lot of talk about testing and testing available and not available. The Bermuda, and I had to read it twice, you had 2.17 tests per person in Bermuda. You had 2,173,021 tests out of 1 million people. I haven't seen any country anywhere in the world that has done more testing compared to population than Bermuda. And and then listening to your numbers in hotels at 65%, comparing this what we have here in Hawaii, and we are in a lot of ways. I think we can compare the amount of alertness and regulations in place coming to Hawaii, what you have been coming to Bermuda. But I found your approach even more interesting in understanding about the test being allowed 5 days before, and then the second test mandatory. I know we here in Hawaii have talked about the second test, and on Oahu, where I am, it's not mandatory. There is a random test. What is mandatory? It's 1 out of every 10. but you're doing it for everyone. How do you, I'm just wondering, how do you do this for visitors? Do you require visitors to go to a medical, to an urgent care, or how do they get follow-up tests in Bermuda?
Yeah, I can talk you through that, Jorgen. So I mentioned the test that's taken upon arrival at the airport. The next test, if you're here that long, is on day 4. And there is a system that emails you to let you know what time window and location to go for that test. The government stood up a testing facility in an old post office in the center of Hamilton, which is also the kind of center of the country. And visitors are expected to go there to get their test. What's been fantastic is that the efficiency of the process conveys confidence to the visitor about how safe the destination is. So when we surveyed visitors in our exit survey, 96% of them said they felt safe or very safe during their visit to Bermuda. And when you dig a little bit deeper, it's because they found great efficiency in the process of how they were handled at the airport, how frequently they were tested. Everywhere they go, someone records their name and information for contact tracing. Masks are worn indoors almost universally. So all of those things together is, I think, what gave visitors confidence in choosing Bermuda, because in the early going, safety was the #1 priority. It was being bested by, it was even besting beaches as the reason. So people who were choosing Bermuda ended up looking at a very short consideration list of places that were really taking the pandemic seriously. And I think that's what's helped us to rise to the top.
And anyone who wanted to ask a question, please jump in here. I just have so many questions on mine, so I'm going to continue. But if I see someone raising hand, we give you the microphone immediately. But I'm wondering, how is the regulation, if any, for arriving airlines? I know there has been a lot of talk, like in the Middle East and the Gulf region, that I think Emirates and Etihad and also Qatar Airways require a test before you actually board a flight. And the same regulations now, I think, is in place since yesterday for UK travelers arriving in the United States. They have to get this test before they get on the airline. You require a test 5 days before. Is there any other requirement for passengers to board a flight to Bermuda or to take off from Bermuda?
So Bermuda's agreement with all the airlines that fly here is that every passenger who boards must first have an approved traveler authorization. And that's the form you fill out online where you upload your test result. You also pay a $75 fee. That fee is designed to cover the cost of all the testing you might need when you get to Bermuda. So as long as when you're boarding the flight, you can show them the approved traveler authorization that you received electronically, you can board. Without it, you can't. And there have been cases where that's been the issue, where someone didn't fill it out, didn't get it in time, and didn't have it returned. The only way you can board is with an approved traveler authorization.
I know from experience right here in Hawaii, we also require a test for passengers arriving from the US mainland. And this test specifically in California has simply not been available. So we had a lot of tourists that booked vacations to Hawaii, paid for their hotels, for their airline tickets, only to be either stranded or they were allowed to travel and then still had to observe a 2-week quarantine, even if the test result came back eventually negative. How do you, is testing available? I know your main source market in the United States, you mentioned it, is the East Coast, New York, obviously because of your geographics. Are these tests readily available? You mentioned Costco. We also allow the Costco tests. I'm familiar with this. But what about like walk-ins at Walgreens or Longstruts or any of these guys? Is there plenty of these tests available in the United States for passengers going to Bermuda?
In the early days of reopening in July and August, this was a real struggle for us. We heard from visitors often who wanted to come, but said they couldn't get a test. because they lived in a jurisdiction where the testing supplies were limited. So if you didn't have symptoms of COVID, they wouldn't test you. And that was a real issue. So we worked long and hard to form some partnerships that make getting a test easier. And that's why you saw the agreement with Costco. We partnered with someone locally in New York because the overwhelming majority of our visitors come from that area. But access to testing generally is a lot easier now than it was in July and August, especially. So we don't hear that complaint quite as much anymore. One of the things, though, we had to solve for is making the testing easily accessible for returning residents who wanted to get a flight. Because in some cases, if you're not a resident of the place that you're visiting, like Bermudians would be when they travel, they had trouble accessing a test. And that was also a motivator for the collaboration with Costco, because that test is available to anyone as long as you just pass the very short online health assessment that you're required to take before you buy the test.
Now, Bermuda, for a lot of different areas, we've been talking on this group and on rebuilding about regional and local tourism. That may not be such an issue, I think, for Bermuda, because I don't know how big is Bermuda. You probably don't have local tourism or regional tourism, because the region, maybe you could expand to Bahamas or to other parts. But this is all far away, and actually the US could be considered regional tourism. Was this anything in the interim you guys did, that local people travel and stay in hotels to get a better understanding about how tourism works in their own country?
Well, I think I'll jump in before Glenn offers any other comments. This was my wife and I's 30th anniversary, and we had planned to go to Miami and then cruise back to Bermuda on one of the cruise ships. And of course, that was in April, and that sort of sidelined those plans. But what we have been doing is staying in various hotels that have been open. So we've stayed in 4. Domestic tourism, of course, is not as great as it could be, because we're such a small jurisdiction. But we do have a staycation plan. I think Glenn will comment on that more. But it has been in place, and there are a number of properties that are open, but it doesn't form a huge part. It's not going to replace, for instance, the visitors coming in. So you're right, we might have to look. There is talk early on about regional tourism. I know there have been some talks with regards to the islands about regional tourism and creating that bubble. I'm not sure where those talks are, but we do have a product. Glenn, you want to?
No, I think you nailed it. When we were looking at ways to help our stakeholders get through this low volume tourism recovery, we looked at staycations, and initially the idea was put on the back burner, because when they looked at their data, I think hotels had maybe 6% of their business in any given year was a staycation. But in this current environment, it was a game changer. A lot of Bermuda residents took advantage of the same thing Cordell just talked about, where they stayed at their local hotels. And in some cases, I remember in September especially, when we had a promotion specific for staycations, we had local hotels sold out. And that's not something we envisioned when we turned the marketing channel to locals as much as we could to try to get us through this recovery period. So I know hotelers especially, but I think this goes for restaurateurs and some of the attraction providers, have been very grateful to local residents, because in a lot of cases, they were not traveling, but still wanted some kind of travel experience. And although Bermuda's not a drive market, they were actually going to a hotel that perhaps they hadn't stayed at before, and really enjoying themselves and getting the kind of visitor experience that usually people travel for. So local residents spending into the tourism economy has been a huge part of keeping the hotels open and afloat and getting those tourism workers back on the job.
Interesting, and it's good for local people to travel and experience, because they sometimes really don't realize, what how tourists feel and what they experience. So I think it's a positive thing for a while to go through. Now, looking at other markets, your traditional markets, from what I understand, is East Coast, North America, is the UK. Are there any other markets you're looking at, you haven't looked at before, that are potential? You mentioned connection to Africa, for example. And I know the African Tourism Board is a big factor here at WTN. I'm just wondering, are there any other regions you're looking to establish tourism connections, or you already did, or you're planning on?
Sure. So as Cordell mentioned, we have been in some of those talks about direct air links with certain islands in the Caribbean. Those have not matured to the point where we have anything ready to go yet. But that has been an exploration that COVID inspired us to look at, when otherwise perhaps we wouldn't have. But overwhelmingly, the future of tourism for us, I think, is in those destinations that are very close, like New York, Boston, Washington, D.C., Philadelphia, Atlanta, the places that we focused on in the past. But there is one area that is newly important to us, and that is London, because although Bermuda has for a long time had direct air service from London at Gatwick, we've always struggled to get leisure travelers to choose Bermuda, whether they live in the UK or in Europe. The performance there has been very stagnant. But we think this spring, because our service from London moves from Gatwick to Heathrow, it is a game changer for us in that part of the world. So we will be investing far more heavily in the first quarter, getting ready for those new flights from Heathrow to start in late March. And we hope this helps us to grow leisure travel from the UK, but from certain cities around Europe as well.
And there is Jennifer Ashley had a question. You put it on chat, but Jennifer, you wanted to ask the question directly. Feel free to unmute yourself. Okay, maybe she doesn't have a microphone. So let me read the question Jennifer put to the forum. She says, what happens if you're in Bermuda for only 7 days, tested negative coming in, but after the 4 days, test again, you tested positive? Will you have to quarantine until you are tested negative?
Yes, so our rule is that visitor would have to quarantine until they test negative. I think in our case, though, forgive me because I don't know this for certain, so I hope it's correct. I think you need to test negative twice before your quarantine ends. But it's also important to note here that our hotels, as a way to encourage travel, have said if this should happen, the scenario that Jennifer explained, that the additional night's stay that the visitor requires because they tested positive would be at no cost to the visitor. So the hotel will assume that cost. And it's one of the ways that they've tried to inspire people to feel confident about traveling again. So in the scenario that Jennifer pointed out, if that person was only there planning to be there with a reservation for 7 days, any days beyond that they were required to stay because they had to quarantine, the hotel will cover the cost of the room night. Other expenses, though, would be at the expense of the visitor, like food.
And I wanted to just recognize a few people here in our group. One is Mario Masciolo. He's in Rome. He's actually the correspondent for eTurbo News, I think, ever since we started in 1999 at ETN. Welcome, Mario, and I'm glad you're a part of the discussion. We have H.M. Hakim. He runs the WTN chapter in Bangladesh. And we have Snow White Snesana joining us from Serbia. She runs our interest group for educational travel. And I wanted to recognize, he doesn't have an official function. I hope that will change. Stephen Brown, and he has been on every single event ever since we started having these discussions on December 1st. And thanks, Stephen, for your loyalty. Feel free to ask questions or come in. I wanted to just ask, let me just see if we still have her here. I think. Yeah, I wanted to ask. We call her Snow White in Serbia, and she's been also a loyal guest, and she's running our educational forum. I'm wondering, Snow White, listening to what you know, heard and learned from Bermuda, is this something what should be shared maybe also with other island nations and countries? Was this something new to you?
Good evening. I think that it is very important what I've heard tonight, as it is, I can see you now. It is very important what I've heard now because it's a very good approach to the problem of COVID-19, especially for those who are positive when they are in your territory, and that hotel are going to are not charging the extra the extra nights for those who are positive. It is very good for those people and for all other people because they see that you are eager to develop tourism and that you're taking care about each person who are step on your territory. And it is very good for their safety and for the safety of other people who are traveling to your country. I think that safety is the number one for traveling nowadays more and more. And because of that, thinking about all persons who are coming, every tourist who are coming to you is very important. And for me, it's very interesting that you have more and more tourists, especially for weddings, because, for example, in Serbia, weddings, if you want to have a wedding, you can have only 5 persons present at that time. And because it is a very big problem, because in Serbia, in our country, people like to gather for weddings for 100, 200, 300 people, and it is a really very big problem because of COVID-19. So your destination is very interesting for those wedding planners, especially from other countries. In Serbia, because of COVID, we have also PCR test as everywhere in the world. I mean, up to last week, we didn't ask PCR test the last 3 months for the tourists, but as many Serbian people are working in outside of Serbia, in European Union especially, in, for example, Italy, Germany, Austria, and there are a lot of pandemic is very high there. And because it was a Christmas and it is going to be a New Year. And after that, it is going to be Christmas here in Serbia because we have Christmas on the 7th of January. And after that, we have a Serbian New Year, which is on the 13th of January. People are coming for a holiday, coming back home, and it was going to be a very big problem for us. And because of that, we include PCR test once again last week until the 10th of January. But as you can see, this COVID is very unpredictable and we don't know what is going on. But for me, it's very interesting. You mentioned London. What is happening nowadays because of this problem in London and that many many countries close their borders for the British tourists. What's going on with Bermuda and the tourists from Great Britain?
So
that is my question.
Thanks for the question. Here in Bermuda, we have not closed to direct flights from the UK. However, anyone who is inbound from the UK or has been in the UK in the past 14 days is required to quarantine longer than visitors from any other place. So even if that UK visitor has a negative test before they left and when they arrived at the airport, they still must quarantine until they have a third COVID-19 negative test on day 4 in our system, whereas everybody else is allowed to get out of quarantine after that second negative test. So that is the approach that the government has taken as it relates to travel, specifically from the UK, and they introduced that just earlier this week.
Yes, it's very good because we still have airplanes from London to Belgrade, and we ask them for PCR test, negative one, but not for the second negative as you do. And I think it's your approach is better for that, because you are then sure that no one is going to no one is having a positive PCR test. That's very good approach.
And
Just,
also-
I just wanted to clarify one thing based on a comment that you made about weddings. And during the course of this year, as Bermuda's health and safety record strengthened, you could have a gathering up to 50 people. And that was sort of a sweet spot for destination weddings. And so we started building a program to roll out in 2021 that appealed especially for people and weddings. We've put that on hold because in this surge, the government has tightened that restriction to only 10. And that one is just a little bit too small for us to activate around. But we think we're going to get back to a place pretty soon where a gathering size larger than 10 would be permitted, in which case we hope to do that campaign, which invites people to come to Bermuda for those weddings, where your gathering can be safe and be at a very, very low risk of COVID spread, which is much harder to replicate in big cities around the world.
Now, since we established that Bermuda is actually one of the few places in the world where if people do want to travel overseas should consider to travel, what is there to do in Bermuda? How does Bermuda look like? Is it a beach destination? Are you an adventure destination? Or is there good food? Why would I travel to Bermuda?
Well, I think I'll jump in here. Glenn could back me up. So there's a variety of activities that you can do in Bermuda. It's not only the beach activities, there's also the water sports, the diving. Of course, there's the restaurants. And there's a lot of history. Bermuda's history goes back to 1609 when the shipwreck, Sir George Somers was shipwrecked here on his way to North America, to the New World. And so our history really mirrors that of the UK, where we have the oldest parliament outside of the United Kingdom in Bermuda. And so there's a lot of things to do surrounding history. And of course, our connection with the US and the US Confederate Wars, where Bermuda played a role in those wars. In terms of smuggling gunpowder to the United States. So there's lots of history here for particularly the US visitors, but also for the UK visitors. So rather than just being a beach destination, there's a whole cultural aspect to Bermuda, and there's a lot of tourists that's being generated around that. I mentioned earlier the African Diaspora Heritage Trail. That's something that was started back in Bermuda in 2005, and it ties where all the African diaspora has been residing. So there are monuments and there are attractions that built. For instance, there's a church that's in Cubs Hill in Warwick that was built in the moonlight by slaves in 1827. And so you can take this tour. So there's many, many things to do in Bermuda. And although we're 21 square miles, people come and say, well, you're only a small island. But they find that if they stay 2 weeks, there's still things that they haven't done that they wanted to do. So Glenn, you can just jump in now if there's anything I missed.
No, I think you nailed it, actually. But maybe there's one thing I would underscore, just in terms of the marketing during this pandemic, is it seems to us that people are very attracted to the open air experience that Bermuda can provide, so that rich culture and heritage is the underpinning of everything. But the visual of someone being able to explore our railway trail, which is a island length water hugging national park that you can mountain bike ride or run or walk or bird watch, that you could find a beach where you and your companion are literally the only people on that stretch of beach. And it's one of the most beautiful beaches perhaps you've ever visited in any of your travels. So I think of those specific open air experiences that can provide some solitude appear to be what people are attracted to emotionally right now because of that health and safety record. But although they come for that reason, I think they find all these other treasures that Cordell is talking about.
Then when people come to Bermuda, where do they stay? You mentioned you shared some of the hotel properties you have. Do people stay 100% in hotels, or do you have bed and breakfast, Airbnb? What are the options, and how expensive is it to travel to Bermuda?
Yeah, we have a mix of property options. Hotels is the most popular. In a normal year, I think about 12 to 14% stay in a vacation rental. So Airbnb, home and away, that kind of option. During this recovery, we've seen a lot of people who are friends and relatives of Bermuda residents who are visiting. So that's a big part of the visitor mix as well. In terms of the expense in Bermuda, you know, it is a low volume, sort of high value visitor experience. But I think for the kind of visitor we get from major cities in the Northeast of the United States and from London and from Toronto, it's a price point that they're pretty much used to coming from the large cities that they live in. But always we're stressing to our stakeholders about providing a value to the visitor, providing them with an experience they can't replicate anywhere else. Because once you do that, the actual price of that experience is less relevant because they're getting something that they can't get anywhere else. And so the value goes up.
And that's a good thing for destinations, because many of the tourism destinations suffer what they called before COVID over tourism and any of these issues, environmental protection. How do people and how do industry leaders stand on these global warming and all these issues in Bermuda?
Yeah, we have a national tourism plan that is supposed to be our roadmap for 2025. And one of the pillars in that plan is about being greener. So it is something we think is really important, not just because we think it's the right thing to do, but if we are going to sustain this great asset we have with this, you know, really blessing of pink sand beaches, we need to protect the ocean around us in order to protect that incredible asset. So we take it very, very seriously. But even a step beyond that, when we talk to our visitors in exit surveys, having a sustainable vacation experience is critically important to them. And it's important that we remind our stakeholders as well that when we provide that kind of experience, our visitor set is willing to pay more for it. So there's a real kind of hidden incentive here to do the right thing and earn more because of it. And I think that's why we don't see a lot of resistance to making the visitor experience greener, everywhere from public transportation to hotel efficiency, to renewable energy, to the protection of our oceans. It's all something that I don't find any real resistance to as I do my work.
And maybe one more thing to understand the geographics. You said it's 22 square miles. What is small? So when people get there, do they rent cars, or it's not necessary to rent cars? You mentioned public transportation. How do people, or they go on tours, or how do people get around?
Well, we have several options. We have pretty efficient public transport, public buses and ferries. We have private transportation companies for groups. And I mentioned that especially because my friend Juanita Jones is on this call, and she's a small business owner that operates buses. But we do have, well, our kind of claim to fame is scooters. You can get around on two wheels. as much as you like, there's almost an unlimited supply of scooters. But more recently, we've introduced mini cars. And that's just been here in the last 5 years or so. And a mini car is an electric vehicle that seats up to 2 people, and you can motor around Bermuda that way. I encourage anyone who hasn't seen them to Google it, because they are fun, adventurous rides that not only make things easier for visitors to get around when and where they want to, but is important for small business owners who are off the beaten path. This kind of tourism option allows more of the visitor dollars to be spread across our community. And that's been one of the greatest benefits, I think, to introducing mini cars into the overall equation. And of course, they're green, right? They're all electric vehicles that don't use gas, and they've been a great addition to the tourism mix.
Wow, what an interesting concept. I love it.
I was just going to say one more thing we haven't covered, which I just wanted to mention, because I've seen, I don't know how long you're going to go for, but regionally, there's been a high dependence on tourism. Bermuda has been fortunate that we've been able to shift our economy where we are less reliant on tourism. So for instance, right now, tourism contributes about 5% to our GDP, whereas international business and finance contributes about 85%. If you look at some of the other islands, they have a much higher dependency on tourism. So we have been able to buffer the economy somewhat with international business, but it's far more labor intensive. So even though it only contributes 5% to the GDP, the impact is certainly felt in terms of employment, where there's a much higher percentage of those employed in the tourism industry. And so getting the economy back, in terms of the tourism economy back rolling again, has been a priority to get those individuals back employed. But if you see, if you look regionally, Bermuda is probably at the lowest in terms of its dependency on tourism for its economy.
Interesting. Well, I don't know if there's any more questions. If there is, please raise your hand. We're a little bit like 20 minutes over our regular time, but I always say we're not the BBC, so we have this flexibility. And this was...
If I may, actually, thank you,
so
Morgan, and Glenn, and Cordell. Thank you very much for being here, and everyone on here. I would just like to say, well, happy holidays to everybody before I go any further. But it has been an intriguing and most interesting and encouraging discussion here this evening. And being a retired airline manager, and currently I have my own travel business that I opened up after I retired last year. My former airline was American Airlines, and I'm sure Glenn and Cordell know that we have a lot of flights going there, and I have boarded quite a lot of passengers going into Bermuda, and most of our flights going there, we started with 2, then we went down to 1, but those flights have always been full, and I've gotten very positive feedback, from them about visiting Bermuda. But most of all, I have a lot of cruisers who are in my business, and what they especially like is the fact that they can go on a cruise, a 7-day cruise, especially leaving from New York, and they can be in Bermuda for 2 and 3 nights, and they can go around Bermuda at their own leisure. They don't have to worry about spending money to stay in a hotel. The hotel is actually the actual cruise line. So they can go out in Bermuda, spend a lovely day, and return to the ship. Then the following day, they're out again in Bermuda and going around where they have not been able to go the previous day. And that's one of the greatest things that a lot of my clients, they look forward to, because they go to Bermuda every year. They want to do these cruises going there. And even though, you know, that they are in Bermuda only, they don't go to other ports. That's what they look forward to. That's what they want, because they welcome they get in Bermuda is very great for them. And that's what they tell me, that, you know what, we want to go there every year. And I had a few groups booked to go there in March as well as in April. And of course, that's when the pandemic came up. But all in all, this too shall pass. And I know that post-COVID is going to be even better. And what I've listened to and what I've seen with the presentations that both of you gave, I'm even more encouraged. And I will be very happy to give all of this information to my clients and let them know that, you know what, don't worry about going to Bermuda, because they've got your back, as we say over here in America. And thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen, and for your contribution. And again, I don't see any more questions, but this was a very informative session. Thank you, Glenn. Thank you, Cordell, for putting this together. And if you wanted to watch the archive, it should be up later today on livestream.travel and also on worldtourismevents.com. And we're going to show it for the next week or two, constantly, together with all our other events on eturbonews.com and any of our other publications worldwide. And so people can learn more about Bermuda. And I just added Bermuda to my bucket list when COVID disappears. I definitely want to check that out and go on one of these electric scooters or cars, you call it. So I'd love to figure this out. But anyways, thank you everyone for being part of us. I see we have a good number of people also watching us now on eTurbo News and our other publications. I see Hawaii News Online, Travel Wire News, eTurbo News German edition, Guten Tag. And thank you for watching. And if you have any questions or anything, Cordell is our only member in Bermuda. Just click on Bermuda and you find Cordell's contact information. We also hope Glenn and the Bermuda Tourism Board will join us. You'll find all our members. We now have 100 and, if I'm not mistaken, 124 countries on board. We're growing. We have a little bit more than 1,000 members. That does not include the large number of observers for WTN. So we're very keen to grow this audience, have more discussions like this, and actually contribute to making the world of tourism better after Corona and now in helping businesses to maneuver through these crises. Again, thank you, everyone. Aloha from Hawaii and Merry Christmas. I know Germany, for example, still has a second Christmas holiday, what is today. And we hopefully we're going to have better 2021. And if you want to be on our New Year session or watch Louis D'Amour from Peace Through Tourism or learn more about Malaysia, look at our upcoming event at WTN.travel. Otherwise, again, thank you so much and aloha from this part of the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Glenn. Thank you, Jürgen, and thank everyone